Well, it's wonderful to be able to spend some time with you. I'm so excited to join you as you take some steps on your journey of connecting what you believe and what you do all day. And it was just such a pleasure to join you in worship. Thank you so much, Nathan. This is Finding God in Your Field. And our first session is Being All of Yourself. Why connect your faith and your academic work? And the format here will be, I'm going to give you a very short kind of 10-minute talk that gives some context and hopefully some excitement for what you're going to do. And then we'll split into small groups and explore further. So we're going to be talking a lot about work at this meeting. So I thought it would be kind of fun to start by thinking of some grad students and professors in TV, movies, and books. So feel free to share some of your favorites or other ones that you can think of in the chat and talk with each other about that. And while you're doing that, I'll share some examples. And I thought it would be fun for the moment to think about a few of the examples that aren't so realistic because they're kind of fun and hilarious sometimes. And tomorrow I'm going to ask you to share as an icebreaker in your small groups the funniest misrepresentation of your field from TV or movies. So a few of my favorites on this front are, it seems when I talk to friends in the sciences that there are a lot of scientific tests that mysteriously take 2 minutes on TV, but more than 2 days in the lab. I also think I really enjoy Marvel. I think Bruce Banner, AKA the Incredible Hulk, seems to have a lot of PhDs for a guy with some pretty unpredictable interruptions to his research. And I don't know about you, but I am pretty relieved that I'm not working as a TA for Indiana Jones. Just imagine the emails. Dear TA, Dr. Jones has missed 3 weeks of class so far. Could you tell him that his explanation of Mycenaean pottery excavation would have been better without those explosions? And do you think that those guys in trench coats will return our missing midterms before the grades are due? Now, I'm also a fiction writer, so I get this. It's a lot of these misportrayals are really fun and harmless, and we can laugh at them and enjoy them. But think for a moment about a time when someone really did sort of deeply misunderstand what you do or why. Maybe they dismissed your field as useless or irrelevant, or maybe they ignored some helpful advice that you gave based on your knowledge. Why does that hurt so much? Well, I think that it hurts because our work really does say something about us. Sometimes it shows what we care about, our interests. Sometimes it shows what we're good at, our skills. And sometimes it even reveals some of our most fundamental approaches to the world. For instance, if you hear that I have a PhD in literature, you'll probably assume that I think about the world in stories a lot of the time. And you're 100% right about that, I do. Now, I do want to be careful here because our work does not fully define us. We as human beings are certainly more than our work. And many people aren't lucky enough to have work that really reflects what they want to do. But work can be a very deep indicator of who we are. And I think that's one reason it's important to think about it in the way that we're doing this weekend. And another part of being all of yourself is your beliefs or values or spirituality or faith. And this often shapes what we hope for and how we think we can get to what we hope for. And many of us do kind of long for moments when what we believe and what we value are aligned. For instance, if you really value being a curious person who explores ideas and questions, and you have the chance to do that in your academic work, that can be just a profoundly satisfying experience. But we do face this challenge, right? A lot of the time, connecting what we do and what we value feels kind of hard. They can feel like two different places without much of a pathway between them. And sometimes we feel like we're less than our whole selves in both of those areas because we can't connect them. And it's pretty easy to have this experience in some way in graduate school. Because often we start grad school because we do have big questions and we value pursuing them courageously, and we're very excited about that. And at its best, the university is absolutely a great place to do that. But sometimes the day-to-day just doesn't feel like it's doing that, right? Sometimes it's an endless cascade of paperwork and equipment to fiddle with and essays to grade and appointments to get to. And it's really easy for our deepest beliefs and values to feel pretty distant from that day to day. So if you've ever felt that tension, the book of Genesis gives us an origin story that helps us connect work and a sense of purpose around our values and our beliefs and our faith. And we're going to spend a little time on a very short theology of work. This theology is kind of like a map at the continent level that helps us see the whole continent of how work and spirituality and faith and values can connect. Now, if you're joining us today and you are a Christian, it's possible that some Christian communities in your life have told you that God doesn't really care that much about what you do all day. Some Christian communities in my life certainly told me that. They said that God was only interested in Christian things, in air quotes, but not in anything else I wanted to do. And I think Genesis is inviting us to a much richer view of work than that. And if you're joining us today and you are not a Christian, I want to welcome you very warmly. And I also want to invite you to think about this and explore what it says to you. Your interpretations may be different than mine, and that's completely welcome and appropriate. And we just welcome you to share what you're thinking, and we'll learn from you. And hopefully you'll be able to learn from us, and we're delighted that you're here. So what I'm about to say here about God and work is based on the book Every Good Endeavor by Tim Keller and Catherine Leary Alsdorf, which is a great introduction to some of these things. There are hundreds and now thousands of years of Christians thinking about work, so there's a lot more to explore if you're interested. But the very short version is that in Genesis, the first thing that we see God doing is work. We know from the many superhero movies that Hollywood provides for our entertainment that a good origin story is going to tell you a lot about someone. And in Genesis, God's origin story actually starts with making something. The work that God is doing is to create things, the whole world, in fact, and then to care for the things that he's created. And we see that later in scripture too, not just in Genesis, but the foundational moment is there. So what does this say about work and us? Well, Genesis also tells us that we're made in God's image and we reflect him. That means a lot of things. But one thing that I believe it means is that we're made to be creative too. And we're also made to care for things. And the way that we do that will reflect God's divine work. So that's the very short version. And it's also the continent size version. But there's another question, which is, what in the world does this have to do with grad school? And that is a very reasonable question, because having the continent map of North America doesn't necessarily tell you how to get from Berkeley to Irvine on a bike, right? You have to do some more exploring at a smaller level than that, or have a different kind of guide or map. So at the InterVarsity's Emerging Scholars Network, the part of the InterVarsity I work with in collaboration with the folks hosting you today in the local and regional level, we came up with a crowdsourced guide where we talked to the thousands of Christian scholars in our network, and we got a bunch of them to write some very short reflections on one or two ways that they saw their work and their faith connecting. And we called it Scholar's Compass because we hope that it's a guide that helps you find your way on the journey of connecting your deepest beliefs in your academic work. So this weekend, we're going to explore together using Scholar's Compass, and we'll invite you to start charting the next steps of your journey in connecting what you believe and what you do all day. Now, we have a big archive of these reflections at our blog, and we've just published about a semester's worth of weekly readings in booklet form, and I believe you'll be receiving that as a follow-up gift. But for now, we'll be diving into these using an online retreat guide, and Tim will be sharing that in the chat. Now, before we go to small groups, which we'll do in a moment, I'd like to just give us two brief thoughts to hold with us as we dive into the rest of the weekend on how to have sort of a theology of grad school or a connection of work and values in grad school. So I think the two things that we can take from this very cosmic theology of work we've just talked about is, since the world shows us something about God, it's kind of like the way seeing an artist's work tells us something about the artist, or listening to an album makes you feel like you have understood something about the songwriter. And there are a lot of ways that that works out in our experience. But one way it works out often for grad students and faculty is, I think we can hopefully expect that each area of study is also going to show us something about God. Now, I know a lot of people who've spent 30 years or more thinking about that in their field, and they still have questions. So it's a complicated, long journey, and we take different steps along the way. But I think you should be encouraged that your work holds insights that help us understand the world God made, and therefore God himself, better. And that's pretty exciting. So those connect also to the first Scholars Compass piece that we're going to read together. So some of these themes will sound familiar in a moment when you start reading. So let me walk you through what our small group time will look like. So we'll have breakout groups, and we'll be reading Glory Seeking Ministry in the Academic Life by a scholar named W. Brian Lane, who is a physics professor. And these will be a pretty straightforward process. So do intros, choose a Google Docs note taker, and then read together. I think it'll only take about 5 minutes because these are intentionally short. So take about 5 minutes and read, and maybe jot down a few personal notes on what stood out to you. And then discuss the questions in your guide. And these are meant as an approximate roadmap, but if you come up with something super interesting that goes in a different direction, feel free to stick with it, or if you don't get through all of them in a particular time, that's okay. So that's the quick guide to small group discussions, and I hope you enjoy exploring these ideas about work more in the context of Dr. Lane's story. I am so excited to hear what you all come up with. So I believe we'll be dismissed to small groups now, and then reconvene in about 45 minutes